Sev Omnis, and in this video I'll explain the consumer aesthetics iceberg. So let's go! Flat design. This style became popular in graphic and motion design because it's quite lightweight among designers. I mean, it's used on websites, animations, and the like. It replaced Frutiger Aero in 2013. It began to develop and reach its peak of popularity between 2012 and 2023. I just realized that I started in first grade. It was 2012. And when I graduated from school, it was 2023. Well, I'm not talking about that. The whole story about this style began with Windows 8. This style became popular in graphic and motion design because it's quite lightweight among designers. I mean, it's used on websites, animations, and the like. It replaced Frutiger Aero in 2013. It began to develop and reach its peak of popularity between 2012 and 2023. I just realized that I started in first grade. It was 2012. And when I graduated from school, it was 2023. Well, I'm not talking about that. The whole story about this style began with Windows 8. This is one of the first operating systems that had this style. Then there was Windows 8.1. It was quite similar in vibe to its predecessor. After these two operating systems, Windows 10 appeared. The latter became the last operating system in this style. Also, before that, the popularity of this style was influenced by iOS 7. All this influenced a large number of software, websites, applications, social networks, and so on. Because of this, in 2017, a style or aesthetic called corporate Memphis appeared. It had elements of flat design, so it began to decline around 2021 to 2022 because during that period, operating systems such as macOS Big Sur and Windows 11 appeared. All because flat design became quite boring and the fact that at that time even children and teenagers could repeat it all in various graphic editors according to tutorials that are on YouTube and TikTok. So you understand why it is a nostalgic visual for most viewers. Now I will move on to its predecessor. I mean, it's Frutiger Aero. Yes, this is the same predecessor to flat design. It was quite popular between about 2004 and 2013. It mostly had all the light and bright shades of blue and green. There was also the integration of nature into the technologies of the future. It will be a banal fact for me, but this style was named after a graphic designer named Adrian Frutiger and the Aero style, which had a wet floor effect and was quite actively used on various operating systems, applications, websites, and similar things. By the way, this style has its own substyles that I will talk about later. It was literally widespread on all devices that had a screen. I'm talking about devices such as computers, laptops, phones, tablets, MP3 players, and even DVD players. For those who are not interested in retro technology or have never held one in their hands, it may be surprising, but half of the above devices had such features as connecting to the internet, switching to airplane mode, and transferring various pictures, videos, and so on via Bluetooth, not only by mail and messengers that existed then. Yes, then there was no such functionality as now. Although for me Frutiger Aero is the first memories of technology and the interior of one of the branches of an international bank, which I can quite quickly recall because there was an aquarium with tropical fish and decor that matched the style of the room itself. So I know that I can talk about this style for a long time, but I won't have enough time to tell you all about it. But one video on this topic will not be enough. Therefore, I will move on to the predecessor of this style, namely Frutiger Aero. In short, it is a futuristic style that was popular from 2004 to 2013. As for the color palette, it mostly uses all shades of green and blue. It also combines nature with technology. Now about Y2K. I know that there are people here who heard this combination and thought about a trend that was not so long ago. Guys, here it will be partially indicated, but in the context of the era. I will start with the history of the emergence of this style. Everything was quite banal there. Calendars and technology literally did not have dates after December 31st, 1999. In fact, if it showed anything after December 31st, 1999, and it was not 23 to 59, then the calendars showed January 1st, 1900. I definitely do not need to explain for a long time that this is the end of the 19th century, not the 20th. Because of this, people were scared by the fact that all the technology would be turned off, the elevators would stop. At that time, there were too many apocalyptic horror stories. As you can see, there hasn't been that apocalypse with technology for about 25 years. Because we've already managed to fix and make money on equipment and operating systems with calendars that were supposed to be dated after 1999. Although I talked about it in the childhood trauma iceberg, which is already on my channel. A little about Y2K from a cultural point of view. As for interfaces, here you need to know what Mac OS and Windows look like in the mid to late 1990s and until 2004. One of the most famous films that was shot during that period is, of course, The Matrix with Keanu Reeves in the role of Neo. This is the main character of this film. I just realized that I was dressing in Neo style when the idea came to make this video. I think it's 100% coincidence. Now about fashion. It's definitely not about plus size, but outfits like the Spice Girls or Destiny Child are just too short a description of women's fashion. So you understand that the 90s of the last century were quite interesting for quite different events, and now I'll move on to skeuomorphism. It is related in the context of buttons in the interface. If we take real examples, then this is a calculator in phones, tablets, and laptops, a background for notes on old and new iPhones, as well as a keyboard that you can use to write your thoughts. From these examples, you can understand that here certain qualities that are present in real prototypes are transferred to virtual versions, but at the same time so that it is not so stressful for the user. In principle, skeuomorphism was noticeable until about 2015. Now only its principles. You can see it on the virtual keyboard. Here you need to start talking about minimalism right away. Minimalism as a style describes a movement in various forms of art and design, especially in visual art and music, where the work aims to reveal the essence or identity of the subject by eliminating all non-essential forms, features, or concepts. This style is quite simple if you are not a fanatic of any form of maximalism. Overall, minimalism aims to create a more conscious, organized, and balanced life, where attention is paid only to what really matters. Now I will move on to corporate Memphis. If you know the millennial burger memes and what they did, you can see what I mean. Its defining features are people with rather odd proportions. The biggest meme animation created in this style is the Grubhub ad. If we take real examples from apps and messengers, corporate Memphis has been described by both professionals and consumers as overly corporate, generic, lazy, overused, dystopian, or soulless. This is closer to reality. It can be done in Illustrator with a pen. Since its debut with Facebook's Allegria style, many major tech companies and websites have also adopted this aesthetic, creating their own interpretations, which has led to an oversaturation of the style. Because it tends to portray a very utopian or highly idealized and inclusive view of the world, some argue that it is a tactic for companies to maintain a good external reputation by distracting customers from their shady or unethical practices. This aesthetic attempts to represent as many people as possible by depicting characters with ambiguous characteristics, such as unnatural skin colors, lack of faces and cultural elements, unrealistic bodies, and androgyny. Although it is quite cool on the one hand, as a result, some people have criticized corporate Memphis for being symbolic in its design and attempt to create the impression that people, especially minorities, are being treated fairly or promoting social color blindness, the idea that ethnic or racial identity should not be recognized in social settings. This is generally considered a major problem when companies using this style have a history of racism or racial inequality. One of the most famous subreddits that was founded in response to corporate Memphis is Commercial Hate, where people post ads that look like soulless corporate content. Some companies, like Discord, have listened to this criticism and switched to other modern aesthetic trends, like cybermorphism. For me as a Zoomer, it's like that teacher who smiles at you and talks about how bad you are behind your back. This is despite the fact that you may be an adequate person. So I'll move on to McBling. McBling is an aesthetic that was popular from around 2000 to 2008 and overlapped with Y2K Futurism. UrBling and Frutiger Aero. The fashion is mostly messy and controversial outfits worn by celebrities from the 2000s. Low-rise jeans, juicy couture tracksuits, Motorola Razr, etc. This style would be perfect for the 2000s theme in Dress to Impress. It's quite interesting here with Frutiger Metro. It mostly combines flat minimalist graphics with a maximalist design philosophy, usually for younger teenagers. Frutiger Metro has a lot in common with Frutiger Aero and other aesthetics of the time. Unlike Frutiger Aero, which focused on detailed glossy 3D designs, Frutiger Metro is flat. For example, there were notebooks that had drawings in this style. This style was very common until 2017. It declined for a large number of reasons. Y2K Futurism. It's about silver, as well as shades of cold colors. It has a common history with Y2K, but about futurism. At the same time, there was even a theme of space, super technologies, and similar moments. There are quite a few such moments, but it, like Y2K, fell into disrepair in 2004. Therefore, I will not dwell on it for a long time and will move on to Memphis Design. This style should not be confused with corporate Memphis. Whereas this style was founded by Italian designers and was popular mainly in the 1980s, it was also partially popular until the mid-1990s. It was created in Italy. While Memphis Design challenged all traditional design norms with its bold primary colors and geometric shapes, its almost extremist approach to anything bordering on anti-design resulted in furniture that was often grotesque, impractical, and impossible to design in a real average 80s home. Although Memphis Design is extremely memorable, it had a relatively minimal impact on various consumer products. Its legacy lies more in its influence on later styles and as a precursor to the postmodern explosion of the late 80s and early 90s with styles such as Wacky Pomo, Factory Pomo, Festival Marketplace, Neoclassical Pomo, and Memphis Light. Some reviews describe it as a riot of color and materials that often overwhelms the original intent of the piece, and discussing its use in Miami Vice sends a clear message: Miami is not like that. Now you can create your own pattern in this style in Illustrator. I'll move from the design of Gen X's childhood to the style in their 20s and 30s. I'm talking about Gen X Soft Club. This style was popular in late 1990s and early 2000s. As you can see, this is one of branching from the popular Y2K Futurism aesthetic of the time. It's considered a more natural and also down-to-earth look at the futurist optimism of the time. It's characterized by different urban typography, the use of plants, nature, underground metros, train stations, airports, city skylines, and with heavy use of minimalism, cool color schemes. Following trends with the rest of visual identity of the aesthetic, GXSC's fashion is inspired by Y2K Futurism's fashion, but with a much more muted, softer appearance. Some trends in fashion, makeup, skin and hair care include nude lipstick, middle parts or natural textured hair, natural leathers, knee-high boots, duster jackets, and other alternative and grunge streetwear styles. I will now move on to UrBling. This style is also known as urban grunge and is an aesthetic that was popular throughout the 2000s. It gained popularity after the demise of the Y2K Futurism aesthetic and coincided with the likes of McBling. It all started in the late 1990s with advertisements, such as Comedy Central banners. Unlike McBling, UrBling focused less on the blinking aspect, glamour, and more on various rougher motifs. The result is a mix of elements from graffiti pop, corporate grunge, and custom culture, These also include various silhouettes of street houses, streetlights, power lines, buildings, roads, logos, flames, tribal tattoo motifs, spray paint splatters, drops. In terms of color, it's about sepia tones, reds, yellows, and oranges, black and gray. If we talk about the style in the media, then it's Black Eyed Peas, 50 Cent, and also Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas. Now it will be quite interesting if you are interested in pixel art, in the sense that it is about PixelScape. PixelScape is an aesthetic that focuses primarily on isometric pixel art. Pixel art is often very difficult to understand because it requires a good understanding of how it works. This style is the same style that was sometimes used in web design. PixelScape was often used in various brand advertisements. It was used primarily in online games in the 2000s to convey an atmosphere. Crossy Road is a prime example of a game that uses this style to its fullest. Frutiger Aurora. Frutiger Aurora is a style that was popular in the 2000s. The reason for this is that IT companies used this style in their OSes. After a long era, this style has maintained its popularity in the early 2010s. Frutiger Aurora first started appearing at the same time as Frutiger Aero. This was around the end of the Y2K Futurism aesthetic. Frutiger Aurora's first major appearance was in macOS X with a series of wallpapers. Frutiger Aurora images usually contain patterns resembling various auroras, beams of light, bokeh, glare, gradients, and dynamic patterns. The visual elements of this style create a sense of peace and tranquility, which is symbolized by the various wavy patterns in the Frutiger Aurora images. This very feeling is also enhanced by the extraordinary beauty of the real-world auroras that Frutiger Aurora follows. Other types of images in this aesthetic can also carry a sense of technological progress and dynamism, similar to various abstract technologies, but still reminiscent of nature itself. You can also see that there is a fluidity of different visual images. Images in the Frutiger Aurora style often contain only a few colors, which are often close in hue. Some images use contrasting colors. However, this is not deviating from the previous color palette. A little about brutal industrial. Brutal industrial aesthetics of stage and graphic design, popular in the era of professional wrestling attitude and ruthless aggression. This term is used by designer Stivs Pips in 2023. The brutal industrial style first appeared in 1995 when TNT aired Monday Nitro World Championship Wrestling. The stage itself for Nitro was seen as competing with industrial steel branding and folding designs. In 1997, the All World Wrestling Federation presented a full-fledged Titantron stage, which, with its fatality, recognized step changes, such as thrones at the edges of the stage and the logo of the website. All the scenes for WWE and WCW at that time included pretty heavy graphics, which included burning cement barrels and steel parks. I want to do this for a logical program. WWE used additional images for heavy scenery and graphics during the ruthless aggression period, such as broken glass, concrete, and matte metal. All these were basic textures for the robot. After the full transition of WWE to HD, this look was lost, and the PG era was released, as it was vacating the aesthetics of Rage HD. Let's talk about DORFic. DORFic is a minimalist aesthetic in the style of abstract technology that was popular from the mid-late 2000s to the mid-2010s. DORFic is an acronym for Daylight, Orange, Red, Futurism, and the last four letters of the word graphic simplified to fic. It is also a subgenre of Frutiger Aero, abstract tech, and can be compared to renewable corporate utopia due to their shared focus on large corporations. Potential precursors to DORFic include retrofuturism and etampunk from the 1960s, as well as the rise of mobile technology and some street art designs in the late 1990s. DORFic began to gain prominence in the mid-late 2000s and was used primarily in video games and corporate design. This continued until the mid-2010s, with 2016 being the last year of significant use of DORFic. Military and factory iconography is sometimes present, using a balance in style between sterile scientific equipment. Overall, DORFic is largely similar to Frutiger Aero in that they both have a very sterile and corporate feel. However, DORFic tends to focus more on industrialism and often leans towards an abstract tech style as opposed to the natural characteristics of Frutiger Aero. DORFic also shares many similarities with cyberpunk, but through the shared use of heavy technology and sometimes corporate corruption, although DORFic is significantly more sanitized and less reliant on neon equipment and holographic imagery. Vectorflourish. Vectorflourish is simply a generic term for two aesthetics known as vector bloom and vector garden. Both of these aesthetics are characterized by the use of vector drawings, flower patterns, random fuzzy nature iconography, and abstract imagery. What separates these two aesthetics is that vector bloom tends to have very complex elements and sometimes psychedelic designs that sometimes include pseudo 3D. In principle, one of the most striking examples is the 2D animation of the Winx Club, a flip phone, and a Samsung smartphone in a shade of fuchsia. These are some of the more striking examples. ElectroPop 8. ElectroPop 8, also known as recession pop, is an aesthetic named after the late 2000s electropop explosion that dominated the airwaves. The style was popular in the mainstream from around 2008 to 2013 and overlapped with the Frutiger Aero aesthetic. The term was coined by designer Steve Speeps on the social networking website Spacey in 2021. Another term to describe this aesthetic is Avantrop, coined by Evan Collins on the website r.no in 2023. Corporate hippie. Corporate hippie, also well known as capitalist hippie, was an aesthetic and marketing tactic prevalent from the late 1960s to the mid-1970s that attempted to appropriate the 1960s counterculture and hippie movement for corporate applications. Corporate hippies' visuals can be described as a more watered-down and also mainstream version of psychedelia, which both containing the same core visuals. Corporate hippie, however, is less abstract and more consumer-friendly. Abstract tech. Abstract tech consists of technological design motifs, such as concentric arcs, hexagons, or schematic patterns intended to represent the abstract concept of technology or to evoke a sense of something futuristic or technologically advanced. This aesthetic is primarily found in media to describe science fiction in the digital age, such as user interfaces on various devices, images of cyberspace, and other technological imagery. Indie craft. Indie craft is an aesthetic that emerged in the mid-2000s alongside Hipness Purgatory, in which both share aspects. It is characterized by a particularly strong emphasis on handmade images such as collage and mock-ups, a charming and cozy atmosphere using warm colors, and a childlike imagination using techniques such as stop motion and 3D illustrations of paper objects. For colors. For colors is a popular and widely used color scheme used in various consumer goods and consumer technology products from the mid-2000s to the mid-2010s. It was first used in 2004 as part of the Apple iPod silhouette advertising campaign. This advertisement has become quite iconic. It is a subgenre of Superflat Pop and Frutiger Aero and mainly consists of shades such as lime green, sky blue, hot pink, and neon orange. This color palette and visual aesthetic is similar to bright tertiaries, which uses tertiary colors such as turquoise, lime green, orange, and fuchsia, as well as a flat humanistic design. For colors, visuals consist of flat visuals that predominantly use for primary colors: lime green, blue, hot pink, neon orange. Black and white are used for accents. This is especially evident in the 2000s advertisements that used this style. This style was created by Sophia Lee. 2K1. 2K1, also known as Dirty Flirty style, was an aesthetic that was popular from around 2001 to 2004. This style managed to bridge the gap between the Y2K Futurism and McBling eras, being something of a cross between the two styles. It features offbeat comedies with big red text, knitwear versions, minivan rock, and hip-hop productions like the Neptunes, all of which grew dramatically during this time period, while teen pop music slowly died down. The term 2K1 was coined by designer Steve Pepys in 2022. After 2K1 ended, it was replaced by the 2K5 era. As you might have guessed, it's named after the year 2001. 2K5. I just realized this style is my age. 2K5 is a television and fashion aesthetic that was popular from around 2004 to 2006. It acts as a missing link between the 2K1 and 2K7 eras and coincides with the McBling aesthetic. As the United States economy recovered from the recession of the early 2000s, fashion at the time began to reflect warmer tones. The first signs of the aesthetic can be found in the new bohemian trend and the WB crush aesthetic. This term was coined by designer Steve Pepys in 2023. Visually, yes, it can come across as cringe. Still, you have to take into account the trends of the time. 2K7. Oh yeah, 2007. I won't dwell on the events of 18 years ago, but on the style. 2K7, also known as the dark and digital era, is a music video aesthetic that was popular from 2006 to 2008. It peaked in 2007. This futuristic video style bridged the gap between the McBling and ElectroPop 8 eras. This look was quite widespread in various music videos, TV shows, and films in general. Dark clothing and cool blue colors are common features of this aesthetic. Producer Timbaland is often associated with this era. The term was coined by Steve Pepys in 2022. Surf Crush. Surf Crush, also known as Coconut Girl, not to be confused with Key West Kitten, also known as Coconut Girl, is an aesthetic that was popular from around 2003 to 2008. The term was coined by Steve Pepys in 2018. It is named after the surfer craze of the mid-2000s and inspired by similar television shows, such as The OC and Laguna Beach. This fashion aesthetic was quite common on various shows. This era coexisted with the McBling era. Metalheart. Metalheart, also known as deathcore or trend war, is a futuristic aesthetic that was a popular trend during the 1998 to 2004 Y2K era. It was characterized by various deformed abstract shapes and futuristic user interfaces against blurred backgrounds. Metalheart also emerged during the Y2K era in the late 1990s, replacing older cyberpunk aesthetics such as early cyber and cyberdelic. Various websites from the period, such as To Advanced Studios and DeviantArt, influenced this aesthetic, perhaps following the success of The Matrix. Metalheart was also named after the 2001 book of the same name by Andreas Lindholm and Anders F. Rundblom. This aesthetic reached its peak in popularity in the early 2000s and then became saturated by the mid-2000s. It was then transformed into vector graphics such as McBling, Frutiger Metro, UrBling, and replaced by Hipness Purgatory. All visual elements consist of various deformed abstract shapes, which can be either with 3D metal and bead blast and chrome textures, or 2D geometric flat shapes, as well as futuristic user interfaces that feature minimalist iconography, abstract lines and lights grids, coded text, and futuristic fonts. Metalheart can be said to be a darker and edgier offshoot of the Y2K Futurism aesthetic, with a more abstract and mechanical feel. Superflat Pop. Superflat Pop is a style of aesthetic and graphic design that was popular from the late 2000s to the early 2010s. This style was inspired by Murakami's famous art movement called Superflat. It is characterized by the use of various bright color palettes, kawaii motifs, and stylish clothing. It is often used in animation, video games, advertising, and fashion. It has similarities to Y2K Futurism, McBling, Frutiger Aero, and Frutiger Metro, but focuses more on kawaii elements. Superflat was created in 2000 by Japanese artist Takashi Murakami to describe his established artistic movement, based on the flat aspect of traditional Japanese art with anime and manga associated with post-war Japanese society. He helped other artists put Japan on the art map and bridge the gap between fine art and commercial aesthetics, essentially Japan's answer to neopop art. The term Superflat Pop was coined by Korea Consumer Aesthetics Research Institute to refer to the superflat style adopted for commercial purposes. demonstrating a more corporate-friendly form of the original art movement. The suffix pop was added in reference to pop culture, according to Corey. Hipness Purgatory. Hipness Purgatory is a free-form aesthetic movement spanning the period from 2007 to 2013. It is characterized by its free-form drawings, a handmade feel with everyday objects, an ironic tone, and a twee retro indie vibe. Regarding the visual elements, Hipness Purgatory consists of various drawings and common objects and materials that mimic the feel of a handmade scrapbook or scrapbook, especially with the use of line-like pencils, crayons, chalk-colored pencils, and markers, as well as materials, objects such as cardboard, paper, and it didn't matter if it was white or colored, paint, stickers, and paper clips. Dollar Store Vernacular. Dollar Store Vernacular is an aesthetic based on designs that look and feel cheap. These are all cheap designs that are quickly created for profit. The aesthetic is often seen on things like carnival signs, fake merchandise, flyers, pop-up ads, fireworks packaging, bath salt packaging, etc. In short, all the products found in dollar stores. Neo-tribal. Cybersigillism, also known as neo-tribal, is a style of black tattooing and a visual design aesthetic that emerged in the late 2010s, particularly in the Berlin club scene. It combines ancient symbols with a digital aesthetic, drawing inspiration from the visual language of H.R. Geiger and various metal band logos, especially those designed by Christoph Speidel. This aesthetic combines various elements of cyberpunk, mysticism, and futuristic amulets, often appearing as organic but also mechanical patterns resembling alien vascular networks or Art Nouveau electrical currents. While some cybersigillism designs are non-figurative, others incorporate common symbols such as hearts, stars, wings, and crosses. Technozen. Technozen is an aesthetic that is largely inspired by the aesthetics of Japanese technology from the 2000s. It can be described as cold, sterile, and professional-looking, while also being cozy, friendly, and cute. It is most often described as a sub-aesthetic of Frutiger Aero. However, Technozen is heavily influenced by Japanese design, while Frutiger Aero is influenced by the United States, Korea, Japan, and other countries in general. Sportsbrut. This style has brutal, rough, and powerful elements. It also uses simple yet rough grids, super effective typography, and grunge elements to convey any action and energy. Preschool Pop. This is about the very vibe of kindergarten, which they will definitely understand. Here, right from the description of kindergarten to the songs that were in your performances. Hexatron. Hexatron is a vaguely sci-fi aesthetic that was prominent during the 2010s and after the end of the Frutiger era, and is characterized by a large number of hexagons, neon blue, holograms, and futuristic technology. It retains some motifs from Frutiger Aero, such as futurism gloss and 3D graphics, but contrasts with it, largely omitting all possible values of Frutiger Aero and focusing on nature, adding sharp corners and edges to emphasize abstract technology. Hexatron's influence can usually be found in modern sci-fi media and real-world gaming technology hardware, such as the DualSense controller. Hexatron is also related to cyberpunk, Vectorflourish, and DORFic due to their shared similarities. Tween. Tween is an aesthetic that emerged around the early 2010s, combining elements of kidcore and the scene subculture. This fusion came about at a time when mainstream culture was beginning to promote the original scene aesthetic among children, similar to teen punk with its emo-inspired imagery, but targeting an even younger audience. The tween scene retains many of the visual elements of the scene, such as animal prints and bright colors, but with a distinctly childish and feminine twist. It is worth noting that the tween scene can be interpreted as a form of commercial appropriation. It takes an existing subculture, the scene, and repackages it for mass consumption by a younger demographic, potentially ignoring its original meaning and significance. Silicone Dream. Silicone Dreams, also known as old CGI or retro CGI, refers to the surreal and eerie visual effects seen in early computer animation, art, and video games from the mid-1980s to the early 2000s. Silicone Dreams often includes images, illustrations, and short films created using early CGI from the 1980s to the 1990s, most of which had science fiction themes, landscapes, or even computer architecture. A significant number of the images contained simple polygons, textures, and lighting, which was due to the technical limitations of the time. This is especially true of images created in the computer program Bryce 3D. The Silicone Dreams aesthetic was also prevalent in the 1990s Trapper Keepers. These were fall folders from the Mead Stationery Company used to organize school supplies for students. It can also be seen as a connecting link between this aesthetic and more modern ones such as Vaporwave, Sea-Pink, Icepunk, Slimepunk, and Y2K Futurism. Pacific Punk Wave, a graphic style that emerged in the 1970s and 80s in the wake of punk, Pacific Wave, Swiss New Wave, and Italian radical design. It also has some influence from the diner, hooligan, poplux aesthetic of the 1950s, as evident in the popularity of Heaven, a kitsch store in Los Angeles. These styles have had a significant impact on 80s style, as it is commonly defined in the 2010s revival. Helvetica Aqua Aero. Helvetica Aqua Aero, also known as Frutiger Aqua, Aquacore, Low Frutiger, or simply Helvetica Aqua, is a subgenre of Frutiger Aero, characterized by the use of imagery associated with tropical aquatic habitats. Common motifs include aquatic life, bubbles, water, aqua colors, and other key elements of the ocean. Helvetica Aqua combines this with elements shared by tropical and Frutiger Aero, such as glitter, futurism, 3D objects, gradients, and tropical and aquatic themes, creating a middle ground between the two styles. Helvetica Aqua's visuals include imagery associated with the sea, ocean, and beach environment. This aesthetic often features common sea creatures such as fish, dolphins, and whales, but seagulls and butterflies are also used similarly to Frutiger Aero. The colors used in this aesthetic are often shades of blue, green, and yellow, evoking the colors of its inhabitants and the seascape. This is combined with elements common to Tropical Core and Frutiger Aero, such as glass textures, gradients, fish, and other tropical imagery. Other common motifs include sandy beaches, palm trees, and seashells. Helvetica Aqua is considered a subgenre of tropical core due to both being centered around the sea and aquatic life and using the same visual effects and presentation style as Frutiger Aero at the same time. Helvetica Aqua lasted until the late 2000s and began to lose its mainstream popularity in the early 2010s. During its decline, the more corporate side of Helvetica Aqua was more prominent than the child-oriented variant with an anything-goes mentality. This was due to the gradual displacement of the Y2K influence over the years. By 2013, Frutiger Aero was in decline, and by 2017, flat design had become the dominant design philosophy of its time. Home decay. Home decay, also known as old world looks, is an interior design aesthetic that gained popularity in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The term old world looks was coined by the Institute for Research on Consumer Aesthetics in 2023, while home decay was proposed by designer Steve Pepys in 2022. On most social media, the style is mostly referred to simply as Tuscan, although this term is inaccurate, as the style is more of a composite of several design trends. HGTV shows and McBling culture were among the culprits that started this trend. Home trends from the 1990s were becoming increasingly outdated as beige-toned homes, linoleum floors replaced with slate, and cornice moldings became commonplace. The Y2K house contains traces of Tuscan, French Norman, and general Old World European styles in the use of textured walls, stone, wrought iron, tapestries, rustic wood or faux wood, and treated marble. MTV Green Sky. MTV Green Sky is a visual aesthetic for music videos that dominated from around 1997 to 2008. Replacing VH1 Sepia Sky, the name comes from the Y2K Futurism era trend of creating music videos in worlds with green skies and atmosphere. This design style was common in most music videos and films of the time. The blue tones of the video were usually over-exaggerated to look green and yellow. The term was coined by designer Steve Pepys in 2018. The roots of MTV Green Sky can be traced back to 1997, when the Y2K Futurism aesthetic was gaining popularity. Digital colorization became very easy to implement, and filmmakers were able to join the trend, feeling futuristic without much effort. The 1999 film The Matrix was famous for using this style. Director Michael Bay used this color scheme for the first Transformers film, which was released in 2007. By 2008, everyone had caught on to the digital color correction trend, and it had become too worn out for modern tastes. Deco-Luxe, a blend of Art Deco and streamlined modern revivals that emerged primarily in the mid-1970s and peaked in the 1980s and early 1990s. This style differs from the early 1970s Art Deco revival, Disco Deco, in that it focuses more on the opulent side of Art Deco and the Roaring '20s, echoing the general cultural milieu of the Roaring '80s. Utopian Scholastic. The Utopian school style was an aesthetic that was popular from approximately 1988 to 2004, coinciding with other aesthetics such as Memphis Design, Memphis Light, Global Village Cafe, and Y2K Futurism. It was used in edutainment software, encyclopedias, primarily published by Dorling Kindersley, documentaries, and children's science, social studies, and nature museums. Common content themes included dinosaurs, animals, especially wild ones, facts about the solar system, the human body, and modern history, particularly ancient Egyptian. It was considered a children's version of Frutiger. After this aesthetic ended in 2004, Frutiger Aero replaced it in educational settings. Visually, the Utopian school style is most commonly associated with the children's version of Frutiger. This particular style, which gained popularity as Kid Frutiger, is characterized by a minimalist composition with a white background, classic typefaces, and included images. However, it has also emerged as a visual representation in an artistic style associated with Romanticism. Visual cues of the artistic non-Frutiger style of the Utopian school style often include, but are not limited to, Dark Aero. Dark Aero, also known as Modern Nero or Frutiger Ego, is a subgenre of Frutiger Aero, popular from around 2006 to 2015. Dark Aero uses a darker color palette, contrasting with the rich color motifs of Frutiger Aero. In the early 2000s, Dark Aero emerged as an alternative to Frutiger Aero, featuring a darker visual style. The first documented appearance of Dark Aero was in Windows Longhorn, a beta version of Windows Vista developed from 2001 to 2006. This was during the transition from Y2K Futurism to Frutiger Aero. Dark Aero retains the futuristic element of Frutiger Aero, while largely omitting its natural, eco component. Dark Aero's futuristic approach focuses more on electronics rather than humanism, in contrast to Frutiger Aero's futurism style. In the early 2000s, Dark Aero was largely unused and was overshadowed by Frutiger Aero. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, Dark Aero's popularity gradually grew until it began to be more widely adopted across various systems and user interfaces. This was followed by a slow decline of Frutiger Aero, which began in 2012-2013. The heyday of Dark Aero dates back to the late 2000s and mid-2010s, roughly 2006 to 2015. During this period, Dark Aero was most often associated with electronics, futurism, neon lights, electronica, dubstep music, flashes, rays, holograms, etc. Despite some presence in the corporate world, it was most often adopted by the younger generation and internet culture, such as gamers, DJs, and programmers. Global Village Coffeehouse. The Global Village, abbreviated as GV, was an aesthetic that prevailed from approximately 1988 to 2004, overlapping with the Memphis Design, Memphis Light aesthetic. It was inspired by the atmosphere and cultural diversity that could often be found in coffee shops around the world. It combines elements of bohemian, eclectic, and cozy atmospheres with touches of international flavor. It was replaced by the missionary school aesthetic. The global village was a kind of reaction to the computer tech boom of the 1990s. It focused on natural themes and multiculturalism. This aesthetic emerged in the late 1980s, gained popularity in the early 1990s, and reached its peak in the mid-1990s. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, GCC began to be supplanted by the aesthetics of Y2K Futurism and Gen X Soft Club as the pendulum swung back towards futurism. While for more casual uses, the industrial and missionary school aesthetics began to be perceived as more authentic. Although traces of GCC design continued to be found in the 2000s, although now less popular, the GCC aesthetic is still used by some companies such as Panera Bread and is occasionally found in food packaging design. The visual style of the Global Village coffee shop is characterized by earthy tones, a detailed woodcut style, and the use of Kokopelli symbolism, as well as other stereotypically tribal symbols. It overlaps in some aspects with the Memphis Design aesthetic, but with a much more rustic and warm color scheme and geometry compared to the many sharp and bright colors of Memphis Design. KGS borrows motifs from a wide range of early 20th century periods: Chagall, Vienna Secession, Public Works Administration, Impressionism, Cubism, Art Deco. Soft Colonial Wanderlust. Soft Colonial Wanderer is an aesthetic inspired by the Victorian era and the period before World War II. It gained popularity mainly in the early 2010s due to the hipster trend that was at its peak at the time. It overlapped with other popular aesthetics of the time, such as boho chic, and even aesthetics dating back to the late 1980s. The main characteristics of Soft Colonial Wanderer are vintage objects such as typewriters, gramophones and hats, hot air balloons, and vintage advertising with illustrations of animals and plants. There is some overlap with steampunk and atompunk, which are more based on media in general rather than commercial applications such as advertising and music videos. Total Afternoon Life. Total Afternoon Live is a television aesthetic popular from the late 1990s to the early 2010s. The term was coined by designer Steve Pepys in 2023. The origins of Total Afternoon Live date back to the famous Canadian television program McBling, which used large glass windows reminiscent of NBC's Today Show. In 1997, MTV launched a new show called MTV Live from its newly acquired space in Times Square. MTV Live and its sister show Total Request merged in 1998 to form Total Request Live, that debuted its own version called 106 and Park in 2000, and Fuse launched daily download in 2004. The stage design of these shows was designed to facilitate audience engagement, with standing areas where fans could gather and interact with the hosts and performers. In general, the set design of these shows in the 2000s was defined by bright colors, neon lighting, futuristic components, and large glass windows that provided a backdrop for the city in which the program was set. To connect with the broadcast at home, viewers were often encouraged to call a 1-800 number. The popularity of this aesthetic quickly faded when music video shows fell out of fashion due to the growing popularity of YouTube. The origins of Total Afternoon Live can be traced to the popular Canadian television program McBling, which used large glass windows reminiscent of NBC's Today Show. In 1997, MTV launched a new show called MTV Live from its newly acquired space in Times Square. MTV Live and its sister show Total Request merged in 1998 to form Total Request Live, that debuted its own version called 106 and Park in 2000, and Fuse launched daily download in 2004. The stage design of these shows was designed to facilitate audience engagement, with standing areas where fans could gather and interact with the hosts and performers. In general, the set design of these shows in the 2000s was defined by bright colors, neon lighting, futuristic components, and large glass windows that provided a backdrop for the city in which the program was set. To connect with the broadcast at home, viewers were often encouraged to call a 1-800 number. The popularity of this aesthetic quickly faded when music video shows fell out of fashion due to the growing popularity of YouTube. Frisurbane is an aesthetic that emerged from the grunge movement of the 1990s, however, in graphic design advertising related to education. It was modified to include aspects of utopian schooling and adapted to the worldview of conservative baby boomers. Used by companies from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s, some of its defining characteristics include the use of serif fonts, often in italics. The aesthetic's name is a blend of the words Frasier, from the 1990s television show, and urban, referring to its target audience of Generation X. Of all the aesthetics that emerged from the postmodern explosion initiated by Memphis Design, Frisurbane is the most restrained and sophisticated, often integrating classical and Renaissance motifs, as well as ecological or natural elements. Renaissance Revival 90s and celebrating the new millennium in a Renaissance-style ancient Gothic, Shakespearean, Elizabethan themes, the Middle Ages, Renaissance interpretations of Greco-Roman art, magic, and the revival of fairy tale culture. Often mixed with obvious anachronisms, fashion show inspired by Renaissance fashion. Shakespeare reenactments using Elizabethan design elements. 90s millennium formal wear with fairy tale inspiration. Grooveable, the return to the hippie flower power aesthetic of the 1960s in the 1990s, carried out as both a nostalgic game for baby boomers and an attempt to seduce children with bright psychedelic shapes and colors. VH1 Sepia Sky. VH1 Sepia Sky was a music video aesthetic that dominated from approximately 1993 to 1997, replacing Ultraviolet Crush and overlapping with the Box 96. The name comes from the sepia-filled worlds that dominated music videos at the time. With the rise of grunge and alternative music, the visual effects of music videos reflected the changing zeitgeist of the time. The term was coined by designer Steve Pepys in 2023. The sepia sky aesthetic was superseded by MTV Green Sky, Shiny Suit 97, and Chiron Crush in 1997. Cyberdelia. Cyberdelic, also known as cyberdelia, is a term used to describe the immersion in cyberspace as a psychedelic experience. It was a fusion of cyberculture and psychedelic subculture into a new counterculture from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s. Like hippie and psychedelia, cyberdelic style is closely associated with the cyberpunk aesthetic of the 1980s, although it should be noted that they are two separate aesthetics. It also overlaps with early cyberspace. Dr. Timothy Leary, a popular figure in the hippie counterculture movement due to his support for the use of psychedelic drugs, particularly LSD, joined the cyberdelic movement to promote virtual reality as well as the use of smart drugs as the wave of the future to create a potential futuristic utopia in place of psychedelics. It was popularized by the fledgling rave scene and cyberculture from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s. Leading to the aesthetics peak with the release of the film Hackers in 1995. It has been frequently seen in advertising, rave flyers, and media since the 1990s. By the late 1990s, the cyberdeli and early cyberspace styles had somewhat faded, giving way to the newer aesthetics of Metalheart and Y2K Futurism. Its demise was further accelerated after the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. However, cyberdeli has since regained momentum in the modern era as a form of escapism from the increasingly dystopian reality we now face. As the cyberpunk aesthetic has evolved since the term was coined, it now features a wide variety of visual elements. The one thing that hasn't changed is the philosophy of using technology as a means to transition into a virtual psychedelic landscape. Early cyberpunk visuals depict psychedelia in a more modern way, using data mosh, glitch, kaleidoscopic patterns, and AI-generated fractal art. Cyberpunk fashion borrows heavily from elements of cyberpunk and cybergothic fashion, which makes sense, given cyberpunk's close connection to 1980s cyberpunk culture with a light touch of vaporwave for a feel-good vibe. It's very bright, colorful, and upbeat, but with a technological edge. Lots of LED charms and LED glasses can add an unearthly touch to your cyberdelic look. Often, what most people would call cyberpunk or cybergothic music can easily be associated with cyberdelic style. as can a lot of early Manchester music. An album often cited as a prime example of cyberdelic music is Billy Idol's 1993 flop Cyberpunk. Partly because Idol was trying to reinvent his image while recording it, and also because he spent a lot of time with the aforementioned Timothy Leary. Corporate grunge. Corporate grunge is a graphic design style used by companies from around 1993 to 2004 for advertising and covers, following the rise of the original grunge movement. The aesthetic is based on bold, rough textures and fonts. Corporate grunge intersected with other audacious aesthetics of the time, such as 90s extreme and Y2K attitude. It is often associated with the piracy, It's a Crime campaign, which used this aesthetic from 2004 to 2007, most notably the infamous "You Wouldn't Steal a Car" text, written in the XBA and D rough font. The color palette tends to be a mix of muted tones with an emphasis on earthy tones such as olive green, charcoal gray, and rusty brown. Visuals may include collaged images, vintage computer graphics, and retro typography. The use of worn textures, grainy overlays, and glitch effects add a rough and gritty feel. Fonts include FF Confidential, XBA and D rough, Stampede, FF Stamp Gothic, and FF Trixie, LTRNCND. Some notable artists whose albums are done in this style include FX Twin and Coolio. Corporate Gen X Cyber. Corporate Gen X Cyber is a short-lived aesthetic. CGXC combines elements of several trends from the late 1980s and beyond. From the typographic experiments of grunge to the incorporation of computer-generated and manipulated images in the style of April Grayman's graphics to a toned-down, corporate-oriented version of early 1990s rave flyer graphics and artistic experiments with computer graphics, for example, Wired magazine. It seemed to be the most common style to look modern, especially for companies in industries related to those that were rapidly evolving at the time: web, multimedia, telecommunications, biotechnology, etc. Certain casual yet understated fonts such as FF Meta, Template Gothic Roadies, DIN are associated with this aesthetic. Modified with grunge-like techniques such as extended underlining, blurring, translucency, stroke displacement, distortion, weights, and sizes. These are combined with images that are sometimes extremely saturated, distorted, blurred, especially motion blur, layered with various Photoshop effects. Colors are constantly present: acid, infrared vision versions of green, yellow, orange, and purple. Early Cyber. Early cyberpunk was an aesthetic movement that dominated from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s. Although early examples had appeared as early as the 1970s, this aesthetic was characterized by crude, pixelated thermographic images with deformed fonts, made possible by the spread of the first wave of desktop publishing and image editing software, often with cyberpunk motifs. It shared common features with the cyberdelica aesthetic. By the late 1990s, this aesthetic had fallen out of fashion, giving way to the aesthetics of Y2K Futurism and Metalheart, for example, The Matrix. April Grayman, Susan Keir, Emigre, Pacific Wave, early rave flyer graphics, The Mind's Eye, crude pixelated thermographic images with warped fonts made possible by the first wave of desktop publishing and image editing software. Early 80s to approximately 1993. A variety of early computer graphics and techniques that were becoming more widely available. Internet Awesome Sauce. Internet hot sauce is an aesthetic that dominated the late 2000s to mid-2010s, with a visual style reminiscent of early 2010s internet culture. It features ironic use of the words cool or epic in visual imagery, including animals, particularly cats, unicorns, and dogs, galaxies, space, lasers, fast food, and rainbow motifs. Meme culture is heavily influenced, with references to internet phenomena such as Nyan Cat, shooting stars, and Doge. The aesthetic is characterized by juxtapositions that combine chaotic, aggressive, or sassy elements with irony and humor, notably cats with laser eyes. The name Internet Awesome Sauce comes from the word internet, referring to its online environment, and awesome sauce, an exclamation popular among millennials at the time. The term was coined by Alex Edwards of the Institute for the Study of Consumer Aesthetics. Pulp Fantasy. Pulp, also known as pulps, were inexpensive fiction magazines published from 1896 until about 1955. The term pulp comes from the wood pulp paper on which the magazines were printed, due to their cheap nature. In contrast, magazines printed on higher quality paper were called glossy or slicks. A typical pulp magazine contained 128 pages. It was 7 inches 18 centimeters wide, 10 inches 25 centimeters high, and 0.5 inches 1.3 centimeters thick, with ragged, untrimmed edges. Pulps were the successors to the cheap serials, cheap novels, and short fiction magazines of the 19th century. Although many respected writers wrote for pulps, the magazines were best known for their extreme, exploitative, and sensational content, although this was only a small part of what was in the pulps. Digest magazines and men's adventure magazines have been mistakenly considered pulps, although they have different editorial and production standards and are more likely substitutes. Modern superhero comics are sometimes considered descendants of hero pulps. Pulp magazines often featured illustrated stories about heroic characters such as Flash Gordon, The Shadow, Doc Savage, and the Phantom Detective. Pulps gave rise to the term pulp fiction for conventional, low-quality literature. The successors to the pulps are paperbacks, such as hard-boiled detective stories and erotic literature. Cassette Futurism. Cassette Futurism refers to both the original and retrofuturistic interpretations of futuristic imagery based on the technologies and materials of the 1970s and 1980s. Unlike other revival styles, where there is usually a clear name for either the nostalgic or the revived interpretations, Cassette Futurism uses the same term for both. Formica punk was coined for a form of revival, but it has very little widespread use. The name refers to the time when, until the early 1990s, magnetic tape remained, if not the only, then at least the most common means of storing and transmitting electronic data. CRT monitors are often used, sometimes evolving into larger, more complex machines, still with curved screens and bulky beige cases. These machines also often have large panels with lots of flashing lights and buttons, and any graphics will be poor. The use of geometric shapes is common, and gribbling is mostly used in places like laboratory walls or spaceships. Scenes can be monochrome due to the excessive use of gray, beige colors, sometimes with a glare of LED light, usually red, green, or blue. If there are multiple colors, they are often similar. Polychrome. Ink in water, smoke, liquids, oils, paint explosions, blurs, color fusions, mostly a wide range of colors. Curly girly, a fun, playful, funny, and quirky style aimed at little girls. The grooveable aesthetic of the 1990s is a major influence, along with the popularity of diva motifs, celebrity culture, and pop culture of the 2000s, as well as some of the pursuit of wealth and fame popularized in the McBling style. Origin of the name. The name comes from the curly serif fonts and shapes used in the style, as well as the fact that the main target audience is little girls. Factory Pomo. The design aesthetic that emerged in the late 1980s combined the clean, simple, and referential forms of Memphis Milano, new visual languages that emerged from the cat boom, and the revival of Bauhaus, constructivism, WPA graphics, and the general industrial style from the 1900s to the 1940s. Factory Pomo, sometimes stylized as Factory Pomo, was an aesthetic that dominated from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s, emerging from the postmodern explosion of the 1980s. Launched by Memphis Design, this particular offshoot was heavily influenced by the nascent CAD movement of computer graphics, and combined Pomo ideas with visual elements borrowed from constructivism, Bauhaus, and imagery inspired by the WPA work program of the 1930s and 1940s. The result of this aesthetic was futuristic industrial style elements such as gears and metal ribs, contrasting colors, a certain emphasis on symmetry, often combined with color inversion, and an active use of simple shapes. Genera Canar. Genericana is a style that draws on the 1920s-1950s, from packaging to signage fonts. It references American folklore and skeuomorphism, using negative space to convey a sense of premiumness and materiality. Nouveau Organic, a revival of Gaudian Catalan modernism, Art Nouveau organic architecture of the first half of the 20th century, underwater motifs sometimes. A generally naturalistic style prevalent in the very late 80s and 90s, Jordan Moser, Barbara Lazaroff, Iyalo Serfati, and Javier Sinozian are some of the key names. Acid graphics, rule-breaking graphics, a mix of medium and Instagram grunge, full of horror vacui, chrome fonts, strange textures, and self-referentiality. Blob World, a wave of motion design and illustration that heavily utilizes whimsical, elaborate 3D renderings to create playful textures, strange, unusual shapes, surreal compositions, and, from time to time, creepy body horror. Graffiti Pop, the first wave of corporate appropriation of graffiti culture. Typically incorporates cityscapes and iconography that are consistent with a specific time period, for example, trash cans, brick walls, wire fences, streetlights, sidewalks, industrial elements, general urban decay. Also associated with depictions of street, hip-hop, and punk culture of the era. Festival Marketplace. Festival Marketplace is a postmodern American shopping mix, very popular between 1800 and 1900. It was updated in a simplified, bright, festive form, which was widely used in the shopping centers of the same name in the style of Festival Marketplace. Serif font, dots or other simple shapes between letters, picnic boxes, balloons, banners, flags, confetti, diamonds, festival cards, circular logos, remixes of various old American advertising slogans. Sometimes more joyful freehand scribbles or handwritten fonts to liven things up. Simple color graphics, sometimes in silhouette. Sibley Petty, Steingelber-Deutsch and Guard Michael Vanderbilt. Laser Grid. Laser grid is a visual phenomenon that was born in the 80s. It is easily recognizable due to its specific laser style, a dark background, a clear grid, and shiny chrome accents. In architectural and interior design, it is implemented in the form of rectangular compositions, combining black with shiny surfaces, such as chrome and glass. It is this aesthetic that contributed to the 80s fascination with glass block walls and mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling, similar to mirrored wardrobe doors. Initially, vector-core computer graphics were not intended for use in cinema. Although special screens were used, they were used from 1970 to exclusively for creating animation effects. From that time on, in the early 80s, they were often seen on computer monitors in films, starting with Star Wars and ending with 2001, A Space Odyssey. The grid began to be widely used in scenography in 1981 in the film Looker, and the films that most influenced the formation of the idea of futuristic design were Black Hole in 1979 and Tron in 1982. It is not difficult to explain the prevalence of laser grids. They were easy to create. Moreover, new horizons opened up. The development of laser technology in general also contributed to the spread of this trend among designers of that time, because it was associated with elegant grids. Computers, paradoxically, were ignored in graphic design until the 90s, so grids were drawn by hand even when they were already forgotten. At the same time, the continued use of vector-core visuals in the mid to late 1980s is striking, given that 8-bit games had already completely replaced vector consoles. When the laser grid in some presentations resembling vector-core, rather than simply a geometric grid penetrated the technosphere, it merged with the advertising style generally accepted at the time, giving rise to a visual language with a chrome sound. Over time, the grid pattern found, albeit limited, application in interior design, creating a unique, sophisticated, almost monochromatic ensemble, which was brightly expressed on reflective surfaces such as chrome, mirrors, and glass blocks. The popularization of the then Art Deco Deco-Luxe further strengthened the use of chrome in interior design. As a result, large mirrored surfaces became an integral attribute, both in interior decoration and on building facades, extending to office spaces. Many companies took inspiration from the IBM striped logo updated in 1962, which led to the spread of the striped motif in the late 70s and 80s. AT&T, Microsoft, Sierra Entertainment as examples, plus the logos of Input and PC Magazine. Despite the fact that it could be found mainly in the technosphere of that time, and even then it did not always dominate the advertising language. The laser grid visualization became a key component of the retrowave aesthetic, in particular synthwave and to a lesser extent, vaporwave. Less commonly, the grid motif can also be found on Memphis Light Media, a high-tech design of the 80s, which laid the foundation for the aesthetics of vaporwave, synthwave, and other trends since the early 2010s. Jumbled font. Jumbled font. This is potentially derived from the Pacific punk wave movement and influential. Contemporary with grunge, this style is specific to typography. Stretched letters in all directions, jumbled, playful mixing of fonts and colors, objects replacing letters, calligrams, etc. Note that this is different from the more messy, grungy ransom note collage. Wacky Pomo. Wacky Pomo or wacky postmodern is a marketing aesthetic that was popular from the 1990s to the mid-2000s, primarily used for children's marketing. It draws on various cartoonish visual effects and is associated with cartoons from the mid-1940s to the 1960s. It was similar to other aesthetics such as Googie Kitsch and Memphis Design. Whimsicraft is an aesthetic that can best be described as that funky art teacher. It started as part of a revival of folk art and furniture from the 1980s, as well as a new interest in collage, crafts, and the repurposing of industrial, found objects as a way of expressing oneself. It was previously called DIY Handmade Folk Artsy 80s-90s, but was renamed in September 2021. It often features a variety of rich colors and unusual home interiors. If you look at the visual elements of this style, it's usually a simple living space with various surreal touches that give it a handmade feel. It can include various artworks and interesting patterns, among other things. Whimsigothic. Whimsigothic is an aesthetic in furniture and interior design that peaked in popularity in the late 1980s and early 1990s. This coincided with the rise of Gothic pop, rock music, and the prominence of artists such as Tim Burton, Margot Chase, Vrontikis, and Von Oliver in graphic design, interiors, animation, and so on. The style also draws influence from the hippie movement. Various whimsical visuals include surreal, dark, yet somehow reminiscent of Tim Burton films and animations. Moonlight, nighttime, and celestial themes of any kind are often incorporated. This aesthetic includes a lot of overlap with witchcore, cottagecore, and gothic goth. As such, Whimsigothic is full of dark, gothic themes with a warm, whimsical twist. Much of the fashion comes from the witchy styles, which seem to combine gothic and bohemian fashion. If you want to choose things in the Whimsigoth style, it as a style draws a lot of inspiration from traditional witchy clothing and dark, saturated shades, mostly purple, emerald green, burgundy. Layering and flowing fabrics are considered the main elements. Patterned fabrics are also noticeable. Neoclassical Pomo. Neoclassical Pomo, as a style, it is about the revival of neoclassical architecture, the reintroduction of Greek, Roman features, as one of the cornerstones of postmodern architecture and design. It was created in the 1970s and reached its peak in the 1980s and early 1990s as part of the general postmodern movement. Among the main and famous architects, designers were Hugh Newell Jacobson, Robert A. M. Stern, Michael Graves, Ricardo Boffel, Charles Moore. Mid-century medieval. Mid-century medieval is a style that was inspired by the Middle Ages and all its stages. It was popular from the mid-1950s to the 1970s. It was prevalent in almost everything. Mission School. Mission School as a style is in a sense street art. It is also known as New Folkand or Urban Rustic. It is one of the artistic trends of the 1990s and 2000s. This style originated in the Mission of San Francisco. This style is also part of the broader lowbrow movement. Mission School is also closely related to the larger lowbrow artistic movement, or simply pop surrealism. It can be considered one of the regional directions of this movement. Artists belonging to the Mission School draw inspiration from the urban, bohemian, and street culture of the Mission District and are strongly influenced by graffiti, street art, comics, and cartoons, as well as such types of folk art as sign art and hobo art. Mission School artists are known for their use of unconventional art materials such as household paint, spray paint, correction fluid, ballpoint pens, scrapbooking, and ready-mades. This representation of their work in galleries often uses what is known as the cluster method, in which a number of different works are arranged side by side on a wall, rather than separated by empty space as in traditional placement. You can make your own conclusions about this style. Industrial Gothic. Cyber Gothic is a subculture that combines the aesthetics of goths with elements of cyberpunk, industrial style, technological futurism, and rave culture. If we were to describe the image of all cybergoths, it would be: first, the hair is often neon or decorated with synthetic dreadlocks, the so-called cyberlocks, made of hoses, rubber, plastic. Second, the makeup is bright, with clear contours, often in acid or metallic colors, and has characteristic hairstyles. Third, the clothes are tight, latex or vinyl, with elements of industrial style, belts, chains, reflectors. Fourth, accessories, goggles, glasses like those of pilots or welders, masks, chokers, bracelets with spikes or LED lights. Fifth, shoes, giant platforms or knee-high boots with massive buckles. Cyber Gothic music. This subculture is inextricably linked with music, in principle, as well as Gothic with its substyles. One of the main directions is EBM, full name electronic body music, that is approximately between techno and industrial. Agrotech, synth industrial, ominous, rhythmic, dance sound. Famous bands: VNV Nation, Combicrist, Covenant, Grendel, Apoptide, Berserk, Icon of Coil. Here are some ideas for images in Dress to Impress. You have already talked a little about cybergoths. Radical surrealism. Radical surrealism emerged in the late 1960s and reached its peak in the 1970s. This was when the pop art movement was influencing graphics, products, and interior design. The main proponents of this style emerged from the Italian radical design movement. Groups such as Studio Alchemia and Memphis Milano. Until the breakthrough in the 1980s, Think Big, a chain selling large pop versions of everyday objects, also emerged in the spirit of the times. Gay 90s revival. The gay 90s is a term and historical periodization that refers to the decade of the 1890s. It is known in the United Kingdom as the naughty 90s and refers to the decade of the supposedly decadent art of Aubrey Beardsley, the witty plays and trial of Oscar Wilde, social scandals, and the beginning of the suffragette movement. Despite the term, part of the decade was marked by an economic crisis that was significantly worsened when the Panic of 1893 caused an economic depression in the United States that lasted until 1897. Patel Southwestern. If we briefly describe Patel Southwestern as an aesthetic, it is a Wild West vibe, but with a pastel color palette. Rad Dog, Neon Surf. Rad Dog, Neon Surf is a style that was popular from the late 1980s to the early 1990s. It features neon colors, hypercolors, tribal motifs, and various radical skate surf designs. Various brands with teenage items became the mainstays of this theme. So I was able to explain the whole iceberg to you. Basically, don't forget to like and subscribe, and in the meantime, I'll move on to working on the next iceberg.